moderating, so we'll go from there.
Thank you very much, Napoleon, and thank you for sponsoring this this session. And welcome to all of you, and welcome to our panel from my left, from my right to left. That would be your left to right. Dave Lapan from the Defense Department, Eva Neumann from ENC Communications, Ed Pound from the Recovery Board, and Carl Fillichio from the Department of Labor, and I'll introduce them for a little bit further later, although you have their bios in this fine publication. I'm excited by this, this topic and this group. I think we have a wonderful group to address it. And I just got through, I guess many of you saw, but perhaps our panelists didn't see, an interview with Secretary Sean Donovan, in which I asked him, about the importance of measuring federal programs and communicating about the success of federal programs, or the success or failure, being transparent and open about how we're doing in the federal government. And it's my view that, especially in this time of budget crisis, if you will, budget austerity, communicating about what you are doing in federal agencies and federal programs is increasingly important. So a word or two about our panel. Dave Lapan has had years of experience in public affairs jobs in the military, in the Marine Corps in particular. I got to know him a bit when he was at the right hand of General James Conway, who was Commandant of the Marine Corps until he was succeeded last year by General James Amos. Dave now works for the new chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey. And before that, he had a job, another very senior job in the Defense Department Public Affairs Office, where he was telling me that he was in the briefing room every day, on the record, answering questions from pesky reporters and bloggers, and some of whom probably knew what they were talking about, and others who didn't. But he was in danger every moment of every day of putting his foot in his mouth. I always worry about that myself in every public speaking experience I have, but he's still here, so he did manage to avoid that. Eva Neumann is, I'm excited to have her here. She's an old friend, and she has been in the public affairs and marketing business in Washington for many, many years. And so she's been working to frame messages of various institutions that often are dealing with government, and in recent times she has also expanded her work to include communications on behalf of federal agencies, including parts of the Defense Department, the National Science Foundation, the Department of Homeland Security, and NASA. Ed Pound, welcome Ed, is my former colleague at National Journal, and we were very excited when he agreed to join us at National Journal. He is a Pulitzer Prize finalist who was known for his enterprising work, including a lot of investigative reporting that probably made a few government officials squirm at times, but now he's on the other side of the fence and is working for the Recovery Accountability and Transportation Board. Is that the right title? Transparency Board. That's right. Whose leader is Earl Devaney. So Ed helps shape the messages coming from that board. As you know, that board was the oversight board, is the oversight board for the stimulus program, $800 billion in spending, and is, I think, perceived as being one of the most open and transparent, a success story in transparency, which has a terrific website that is probably the standard for transparency in the federal government, especially in as much as it deals with many, many different programs in many, many different agencies, in places, zip codes, localities all over the country. Carl Fillichio, another old friend. I've known Carl for years. He was a senior leader at the Council for Excellence in Government with my old friend Pat McGinnis, and he's been in and out of the labor movement, and most recently has been at for the entire Obama administration, has been at the right hand of Secretary Hilda Solis at Labor. Has responsibility for communications, policy, strategy on behalf of a very important large domestic agency, which of course has a lot of responsibilities in the jobs crisis that we are now experiencing. I thought we'd start with, so that's the kind of framework. How do you think about communicating about what you're doing, the importance of what you're doing, and how do you get your message out in an effective way in this time of troubles, really, for the federal government? I thought we would start with Dave Lapan, who now represents an institution and has represented an institution that I know has been concerned about its communications with and image with and relationships with the broader community. Only 1% or so of the population has any direct connection to the U.S. military, and the U.S. military, I know from having talked to Mike Mullen, who just stepped down, and others as Joint Chiefs Chairman and others on the Joint Chiefs, the military is concerned about connecting, if you will, and being known and appreciated in the community at large. So Dave, that's a considerable communications challenge, and I thought that maybe we could start by talking about that and how you and others at the Defense Department have been approaching that task.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be here. It's always great to get out of the Pentagon for any length of time. I guess I'll pick up on a couple of things that you said, Tim. Earlier you talked about transparency, so I'll get to that, but I'll start where you ended with this connection, or a gap, as some people see it, between the military and the department and the larger, broader public. As has become, one of the common sayings, we're that other 1%. Not setting up camps in cities around town, but that, again, recognizes that the military today, as an all-volunteer force, has fewer connections with society writ large. There are fewer members of Congress that served in the military. There are fewer individuals across the United States that have personal connections to the military through relatives, friends. So one of the challenges for us is, how do we communicate to a broad public that doesn't have, one, daily interaction with the military, and two, a very good base of understanding of who we are and what we do. Couple that with the fact that we are the largest agency in the federal government, and it's a tough time to be in government, especially the federal government. Americans are angry with the government, in many cases deservedly so, but because of that, it makes it difficult to, again, be representative of a government agency and to communicate your message. So while on the one hand we are talking about the military by and large, we have a large civilian population within the Department of Defense, not only here in Washington, but spread out across really across the world. And so how do we translate, if you will, what we do on a regular basis out to a public that doesn't really see us on a routine basis, doesn't necessarily understand, and quite frankly, in today's world, has lots of other things on their minds and concerns. It's interesting here in Washington, we talk about the Beltway effect and what we see on a daily basis and what we pay attention to. Over in the Department of Defense, it's the early bird syndrome. We have the early bird which is a compendium of stories about the Department of Defense that all of our senior leaders read. And we tend to get sucked into that and think this is all about us. And then you go to Newsmap and you go to other, I mean, frankly, even go to Google News and you see, hey, we're not there anywhere. You know, but this morning I saw 30 different stories that somebody pulled out that were all about us. And so again, we have that challenge that Americans have other things on their minds, other priorities, and the military is not always there. Another challenge that we face too is that on a day-to-day basis within the Department of Defense, we have some amazing stories, we have tragic stories, we have not so good stories. I was telling Ed, we never have a day off. I mean, there's always something going on in our business, right, wrong, or indifferent, good, bad, or neutral. And we do have a resident Pentagon press corps who, again, are competing with their colleagues to get in the paper, to get on air, and so they're focused very intently on defense and what we do, and so they kind of contribute to this idea of it's all about us. So those are sort of the elements that challenge us on a daily basis. I mean, frankly, all large organizations are bureaucracies. It's inherent. And being a bureaucracy by its nature, you're going to be slow, you're going to be ponderous. And so what we try to do is fight that, bureaucratic inertia that goes on a regular basis in order to be more agile in today's information environment. And that's the message we're always, as communicators, pumping to leaders and others in the organization, that we have to get out more quickly. Yes, we have an obligation to be accurate, but we can't take 3 or 4 days to get to the truth, to get to the facts. So as communicators, we're always pushing the organization to get faster with releasing information. The other point you made earlier, you talked about transparency. And quite frankly, I've said this before, that word gets thrown around too loosely by individuals, and they don't really stop and think about what it means, because transparency means something that we're not really going to achieve. You can have a desire to be transparent, but especially in my business with classified information, with national security secrets, we can't be transparent all the time. So it's our job to find those places where we can be transparent, where we can talk about what we're doing, and to do so, one, quickly, and two, in ways that the public understands, because again, they don't necessarily have that frame of reference. So I will leave it there, if that's okay. Give time to my...
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Thank you for that good introduction. Carl, I think I might turn to you. You are here representing a major domestic federal agency, and with many different subcomponents. And in my perception, sometimes in domestic agencies, more so than in the Defense Department, I would say, that the public affairs operation tends to focus on the top-level political appointees. Is that right? Is it happening at labor? What are the communications challenges that you deal with on a day-to-day basis at this huge federal agency?
Well, one of the biggest challenges, and I think all of the panelists are going to talk about this, is our biggest challenge is change. I mean, there was a time, I've been doing this for 20
Can you hear him back there?
Me?
Yes, okay.
I've been doing this for 25 years. There was a time, I think we've forgotten this, that, there were a lot of major newspapers and 3 network television stations, and that's how you got your news. That has all changed. Today, back then, if you got something in the Washington Post, that would lead the nightly news. Today, I don't think many people even know who the anchor for the CBS Evening News is, and the fact that the last one just left to moderate a talk show just goes to show how much news has changed. Now blogs and Facebook and YouTube videos can actually lead the news. What hasn't changed really is the people who have to provide the content and the information. And that's where I think we're putting most of our focus. Look, there's going to be a next big Twitter. There's going to be a next big Facebook. Google's going to change from Google Plus to Google Plus Plus to Google Plus Plus Plus. Okay? What is not going to change is that people have to provide the content. So what we're focusing on is making sure that our people are agile and that our people can adapt to these different types of communications challenges. So, you know, the technology is all there. It's going to keep going. It's the people. You know, it's interesting. We don't call ourselves public information officers anymore because the word information isn't being used that much anymore. It's now called content. You know, so all of these changes are really sort of developing how we hire people, how we train them, how we retain them, and how we sort of set up, you know, what they do and what their expectations are. I'll give you a couple of examples. There was a time 10, 15 years ago, you know, when you said you had a press, you know, a dedicated press corps, gosh, I miss that. Okay, there was a time when...
be careful what you wish
Yeah,
for.
it's true. I mean, there was a time when every major newspaper, every media outlet had a labor beat reporter. I can name labor beat reporters on one hand now. And so what we're dealing with now are reporters or bloggers who cover all sorts of stuff. And so they don't know what the FLSA is or the Mine Safety and Health Administration is. So a lot of our job is educating people who we never had to do that before. And so, you know, when we first started, when I first came, I noticed that our press releases, you had to be a Supreme Court clerk to understand our press releases. I mean, you really did. I mean, they were just written in all legalese, and most of the stuff comes from our regional offices. You know, that's where really where our action is in our enforcement cases. A few people know that the U.S. Department of Labor is the second largest federal legal enforcement agency in the federal government. We do everything from inspect mines to the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is minimum wage and overtime. So these press releases were just incomprehensible. And one of the things that so I said, why is this happening? And, you know, our folks would say, well, you know, that's what the lawyers want us to say, or that's what the agency wants us to say. And what I said was, look, there are three points to this, there are three pegs to this stool. There's, you know, what the lawyers want and what the lawyers have to do. There's what the agency wants and what the agency has to do. And there's what you want and what you have to do. And you are the communications professional. You're not a stenographer. And for a long time, I think the Public Information Office was just this mouthpiece. And now we are in, there's just a desire and a need for us to do more than provide information. Today we announced the weekly UI claims, unemployment claims, okay? Anybody could just check on the website and find out what that is. What my people need to do is to be able to explain what they mean. And that's where the big change is. So I think it's relevant to talk about it in this conference where you're talking about excellence in government. Our message can't be excellent unless our people are excellent.
Carl, let me just follow up for 1 second. We talked a little bit with Sean Donovan about, you know, the image of the federal government. It's under attack. It's a tough time for the federal government. Regulators in particular are under attack, and not only by the Republicans in the House, although that's a particular thrust, but also to some extent by some Democrats. You're a huge regulatory agency, as you just said. What can you do, or are you doing, or is there any point in trying to develop communications messages and strategies that communicate to people the importance, if you will, of doing what you're doing, including in the regulatory arena?
I'm always baffled why there isn't a lobby against speed limits or rules in football. I mean, we are a nation of laws, and we enforce laws. And we make a very, I think we make a very compelling case that, you know, that our regulations save lives, make people more effective, make people the very best at what they can do in the workplace, ensure that their job means that they can pay their rent and feed their kids and get to work the next day, and all of those things. It's more of a political debate than it is a policy debate. You know, the Post did yesterday a story about regulations, and if you look at, you know, why businesses go out of business, information that we actually report, regulations are not one of the main reasons. I mean, there's all sorts of other reasons. It's often a shiny object that people use to distract what really the problem is. But I want to go to something else that you said earlier about accountability and measuring communications efforts. You started that, and Secretary Donovan talked about that. One of the things that I think people don't know about our profession is why we do it. And when you talk about measurements, I think people get in their head that, you know, every morning I go to Hilda Solis and give her a stack of clips and say, you got more than Sean Donovan did today. And that's not what we do. We want to be in the newspaper because we want people to know that we can help them. So we promote back wages that we've won for Thai workers at a Levi Strauss facility in California, or restaurant workers who we won back wages for, or 500 women at a facility that we won back wages for through the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, because we want other people to know that's what we do, and if you're going through this problem, we can help you. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that message, that bottom line message, often gets lost in these discussions because we're so focused on, you know, number of clips, number of impressions, number of this, and compared to whom.
Yeah, well, I think that's precisely a very good example. So you are, with that kind of activity, communicating the importance of what you do. Now, Ed, I want to turn to you for a sec. You are in charge of communications in what has been another very controversial, and we touched talking about regulation, but another very controversial program, the stimulus program. Some people say it's failed. You know, others pick on little scandals here and there. But I think, well, you tell me how you have approached the job of communicating about this program, which I guess you think has been successful, and you know, how do you persuade the American public?
I think that I certainly think that the board that I represent has been successful. I wanted to turn first, though, Tim, to a point that Carl made, which I think is very relevant. When I was a reporter for many years, 45 years. To many people, I was probably the enemy when I came into a government office to try to seek information. But one of the things that used to drive me nuts, and still drives me nuts, about the government is press releases. I mean, you read a press release from a prosecutor and or the Justice Department or just about any agency, and they have 9 people announcing it in the lead. You don't know what the hell they're talking about. And so when I came to the board, one of the things I did was basically we write press releases like news stories. And the reason I do it that way is so, one, that somebody might actually read it and pick it up, and 2, that it makes it a lot easier for our people to blog and tweet and get that information out into the atmosphere, so to speak. In terms of the board is a much different operation than what Carl has to deal with or what Dave has to deal with. They're much bigger operations. The board is essentially a very small operation. It's an independent board. Earl Devaney is the chairman. There are 12 other inspectors generals who sit on this board and set the policies and the actions that we're going to take. My job, to be honest, we've been successful, but I can't take a whole lot of credit. To be honest, I think I was fortunate. I knew Earl Devaney for many years. He still remains the Inspector General at the Interior Department. And he's chairman of the board, of the Recovery Board, and we were friends, and I took this job. And Earl is a masterful communicator, and he understands the press corps. He understands what you have to do, that you have to get your message out, that you cannot run from reporters. And we haven't run from reporters. The program was quite controversial the first 18 months, and we were in, to quote a former president, a lot of doo-doo at times. But On the other hand, we never ran from reporters. We took all questions. Earl is always accessible to legitimate and credible reporters and bloggers. I think that's very important. I think that you cannot see the press, bloggers, whatever, as your enemy. You have to look at getting your message out. And you may get criticized, you may have somebody stick it in your ear, but on the other hand, you want to get your part of the story out. And so I've worked with Earl very closely in developing our strategy, and our strategy was very simple. It may sound a little bit naive to everybody, but it's very simple. We tell the truth, and we tell the best truth we can. And if we can't tell you everything, if a reporter says, well, you know, and starts moaning and griping about this or that, I say, look, I don't have the authority. I can't tell you anymore. This is as far as I can go. And I think that's, you know, really essential to a good press policy. The other thing is we take all calls. We don't let them sit around for days. We take calls from the public. Some of them are weird, but we take them. You know, we help reporters when they come in. Tim was talking about the website and how excellent the website is. It is excellent, but it can be difficult for someone who's not used to using the website. And so we work with reporters to navigate this website, to find information. Sometimes it'll take an hour or two for myself, for my deputy, Cheryl Arvinson, to go through this with a reporter and get the information that the reporter needs. Now, I don't want to be Pollyannish about this. We've had our moments. I mean, when I first took the job, about 6 months after I had the job, we started filing reports from recipients of recovery money on the website. And there were errors. There was a story in ABC News and other venues that said that you know, $6 billion went into phantom congressional districts. Well, what actually happened was that the people who filled out these reports, the American citizens who got this money, didn't know their congressional districts, and they put in the wrong congressional districts. And we didn't have within the system, because remember, we were pushing this to get this website up and collect all this information and display it all. We had to do this all in 6 months. We didn't have a system that allowed us to prevent that kind of mistake being entered into a report. Ultimately and quickly, we fixed it, but we took a lot of heat in the process. I was quoted out of context, ridiculed at times by certain bloggers and that, but you have to have kind of a steel back. I mean, at first I was, you know, I couldn't believe it. I thought, how, you know, what's wrong with these people? This is a clerical error. People are making this is much ado about nothing. When I was a reporter, I used to do big issues, stories that really counted, you know, stuff that really had an impact on the public. This was kind of nonsense, you know, and it was nonsense. But nonetheless, it was a story that had traction. In the end, you know, and again, I don't have any great strategy to impart here other than, you know, my strategy is I want to be treated. I treat reporters the way I wanted to be treated when I was a reporter. Reporters recognize very quickly BS. And, you know, you have to, if you're going to maintain the credibility and the credibility of your agency and the guy or woman you're working for, you have to be a truthful person. You have to get that message out. That would be the main point I would make.
Eva, let me turn to you. I know that in the private sector, major institutions, companies, associations, whatever, are very careful about how they craft their messages and their image, their brand, if you will, as they approach the constituencies that they want to deal with, many of them in the general public, some of them in the federal government, and so on. And you've been doing some of that work, I know. And you've been doing some work for government. So what lessons can government learn from what the private sector does by way of strategic communications and brand management, for lack of a better word? Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah. I think a lot of what we've been talking about has been about more of the public affairs type of communications and the dealing with the media. And the side that I come from is that side, dealing with the media, but also the side of the proactive communications that go along with change management or with introducing a new solution to the government, so introducing a technology solution from a technology company into the government through marketing or through public relations, or working with a CIO office that's consolidating different operations in different departments and working with them to craft their message on how do they communicate to these employees that how their roles will be different, how the change will affect their customers, why this is a good thing. And there's a when you talk about the brand, it's a proactive approach, and it goes back to what was discussed this morning about setting the vision. One of the most important things in the proactive communications is the setting of the vision, the setting of the goals. And that develops a framework that people can work against and something that can be measured. And when we work with companies or with agencies, the principles of communications are still the same. And it's interesting how you can see the parallels between, there's really not that much difference between the private sector and the government sector as far as what the practices are and the processes that you use for the communications. Starting out with what's the vision, what's the goal, what are the objectives. And often we'll walk into a room and we say, what does success look like? And it seems so simple. But if you can state at the beginning what success looks like, then you can define the measurement metrics, and then you can start prioritizing, deciding what you are going to do, but also what you're not going to do. And that vision becomes the flag that you're after, that you can rally around and you can make decisions against. And then setting the target audiences and figuring out, again, who's an important audience to reach and who's not as important. And it's all, good communications is all about making choices. It's about the transparency and the being honest. It's about having the conversations, but it's also about what are we going to do, what are we not going to do. Figuring out what the audience pain points are and challenges are and concerns and fears. And how do we, as communicators, create those words, and we call it the message, that bridges that what we need to communicate and what the program or the solution that we're communicating or the benefits, for instance, with a fee-for-service group, what are the benefits of using our organization? And then understanding what the perceptions are in the audience, and the perceptions and also what the needs are. And then as communicators, writing the words and putting together the sound bites, and also the communications tools, the brochures, the websites, the talking points, the training seminars, the trade show graphics, from this very simple, which the logo and the brand, or a graphic on a display booth, to the broader, the annual report for the department. What's that common message? Who are the audiences? What are we trying to communicate? What are we trying to, what's our vision? What's our goal? Does everything else map back into that? And as far as promoting and developing the brand with that message and that common vision, the understanding of the audiences, then we get into the execution of the tactics and what are the right tactics to use and what's not relevant. And something that came up earlier we were talking about is communications changed. You go back the years and years and years and tell the stories about back when. Daily, weekly, monthly, we are exposed to, and we, I mean ENC, our company, are exposed to new vendors that have new technologies and new innovation that lets us communicate differently. So it's Twitter, it's Facebook, it's, I can go on and on, I can't think specifically, but it's constantly changing, and there is that core communication strategy. It's still the message, it's still speaking clearly, but nowadays we have to take our message out to where people are accepting messages, because people don't read the newspaper anymore. I remember sitting with my parents at the 7 o'clock news every night, and that was a family ritual. You know, I mean, I don't even watch the 7 o'clock news every night. I try, but I'm old-fashioned and I'm wedded to that tradition of the TV and the journalism and the broadcast. But now people self-select what they want to receive. And as communicators, it's our job to make sure that our message and our deliberate communication strategies, what we do and what we don't do, is directed towards being and getting the information where it needs to be so that people can get it the way they want to get it. And that's where we get back to the Facebook and the Twitter and the RSS feeds and the website and the self-selection and going to a website and figuring out, and I can go on and on and on, get real detailed, but looking at every communications activity as a channel, and who are our users, taking it back to the audience, who are our users, what do we want them to believe, and then are they finding that information the way they need to find it? So you think of a website with an architecture, or you think of a brochure with a layout of a brochure, or a radio program or interview. What are the key things that we need to talk about? Are they things that are relevant to that audience? Are they able to find the information they want to use? Is it easy to understand? And then the measurement is a critical part, and that was talked about as well. And that's where you come back to what our vision was originally and how are we achieving that. And there's so many different ways to measure. We had a discussion, a little working group in the office the other day, just brainstorming on different measurement tactics. And it can be things like standard traditional communications measurement tactics, such as have we changed audience perception? Doing a baseline survey, baseline focus group, what do people think? And then running your communications program, and then after the fact, have we changed their perceptions or their beliefs? To how long people are on each page, and then going back on the website, or what pages are most frequently used, or what tweets are most popular. And then using that information to constantly refine the communications. And I think that's one of the things that's really important is communications is a process. It's not just an activity. We often say that we don't do activity for activity's sake. It needs to be part of a well thought out process, project plan with milestones and measurements and corrections and then retooling and constantly changing.
So I know Carl wants to get in, but I want to ask Dave a kind of a question first that follows from this. Strikes me that the military has had a lot of activity to brand itself. There was the Army of One campaign. You know, there's the connection with NASCAR. There are other efforts like that. How is that going? Is that and are there any new developments in that? And is that still a focus for the military services as they look toward their future, the kind of branding activities and communications of that nature?
It's interesting in that there's a bit of a disconnect in the way that we do that, because by and large the branding is a function of the recruiting element. Mm-hmm. So the idea is we use the branding to draw in the people that we need. And it's not directly connected to what I do, or how we communicate on a regular basis. We obviously are aware of what the brand is, but we in communications don't routinely use it. We do have advertising elements, again, usually within the recruiting branches that are heavily involved in that brand. And those are the folks that get together with NASCAR or Major League Sports and try to find, again, reaching an audience in a very traditional sort of marketing advertising perspective. And then, as Eva said, we're talking more traditional public affairs activities. Mm-hmm. And so the brand is there, but it's not something that we are working on the public affairs communication side on a routine basis.
It's more program related, the communications. So it's the communications for the recruitment is certainly driven out of the recruitment office, and it's with a very keen objective of reaching those audiences that are most needed within the military, and then the communications plans and programs are crafted to achieve those recruitment objectives.
Right, and again, in what I'm doing, it's more the broad audience, whereas those guys are very interested in demographics. It's mm-hmm. who do we need, what's the target audience to reach to enlist or to come into the particular military service, where we're reaching a broad segment of the population.
Yeah, in a way, so that's a much narrower audience that they're reaching out to, whereas you are trying to deal with the you have to deal with the entire American public, basically. Carl, you wanted to say something. Yeah.
Well,
yes,
in your question where you talked about the private sector, I mean, I think there's a myth, and I'm happy to dispel it right here, that the private sector does this better than the government does. I worked in the private sector. Lehman Brothers. Excuse me.
Lehman Brothers.
Lehman Brothers, okay.
Well, their brand is gone.
Yes. But I'd worked
That's because they lost Carl.
The two were related. Not my fault. I found the private sector more bureaucratic than government. And I was at Lehman Brothers for a very short period of time, but I found it incredibly bureaucratic. I think government is a great place if you are creative, if you are ambitious, if you want to try new things. I think, and I don't think this has anything to do with political party, I think the leadership, particularly in our arena of communications, loves good ideas, loves to get things out. The issue is that stuff like, and it's great that you raised, because we have this discussion all the time about, oh, we need to sponsor, the Mine Safety and Health Administration needs to sponsor a car at NASCAR. We need to do that, and I'm like, well, we're not recruiting minors. Okay, we're trying to, and I make this, and because now there are so many channels. I used to love to watch Keith Olbermann on MSNBC. I don't know where current TV is on my 800 channels I have now. I used to like Dan Rather on the CBS Evening News. I don't know where he is now. It's just too hard to find. And so we do narrowcast more. I'll use MSHA as an example, the Mine Safety and Health Administration. We're always talking about how can we get more miners to think about mine safety and things like that. And here's what I could do. I could ask for $100,000 and ask one of the Kardashian sisters to make a public service announcement for me. I could do that. We wouldn't have to buy any airtime. Maybe $50,000, and Chloe would do it. But the reality is,
what clothing?
What?
Did you say clothing?
No, Chloe Kardashian. She's lesser. She's on the less scale. She's on the lower price scale. Yeah. Okay, but everybody knew who the Kardashian sisters were, right? Okay, so I could get, I could get them to make, one of them could make a public service announcement for me. I wouldn't have to buy any airtime. I wouldn't have to really do much, but put a camera in front of one of their faces, and then I would put it on our Facebook and put it on, and Twitter it out. And let me tell you something. Everybody would be talking about mine safety. You'd be writing about it. You'd be writing about this campaign. I got you talking about mine safety. Here's the reality. We're not going to do that. We're simply not going to do that.
Why is that, Carl?
Well, because we're the federal government, not the private sector.
I got it. Okay.
No, I mean, to a large extent, I mean, I think that we're held to a much higher standard in our communications than anybody else is. We're not, okay, Sears hired the Kardashian sisters. Skechers hired the Kardashian sisters. Lots of people hire the Kardashian sisters. But we're not going to do that. And let me tell you something. I could pay, Khloe Kardashian $25,000 to just tweet once about mine safety, and everybody would talk about mine safety. We know that.
Okay, so we'd like to take your questions. Let me ask another question, and then if you would identify, oh yes, we have a microphone, so just stick your hand up and our microphone will come to you. Ed and Dave, you deal with reporters day to day, and you have done that in recent times. Characterize for us, if you would, what you see by way of changes in the press corps. What's it like now? I mean, it's much different than when you and I, Ed, came into the business. What kind of people are you dealing with?
Well, and I talked before about the resident press corps, and that's a great place to start. It's been seismic changes, really. When I was at the Pentagon before in the late 90s, you know, there was a traditional Pentagon press corps that was, you know, the Post and the New York Times and the networks and very much what has, you know, become known as legacy or mainstream media. Today's Pentagon press corps and the folks that came to those on-the-record briefings every day included online journalists, included foreign journalists. It's a much more diverse group now than it was, you know, just 10 years ago. And for communicators, that presents a challenge because, again, before you built relationships, you understood who the reporters were and the way they operated. And I had to be very careful in these on-the-record encounters because I'm dealing with, you know, journalists from India or Pakistan that aren't, you know, don't operate the same way that maybe some of the U.S. media did, Asian media. Again, bloggers. As Eva suggested, you know, in terms of the, you know, monthly, weekly, that's the other huge change is there's no deadlines. They're minute-by-minute deadlines. Mm-hmm. All the wire services. I mean, I would hold what we called the gaggles, which were these, you know, on-the-record, off-camera briefings every day. And 10 minutes after it's over, I'm reading about myself on one of the wires. There's an alert that's going out about something. So it's that speed, it's the diversity of the press corps, it's the competition, which has just gotten, you know, ruthless. And so all of those things impact the information environment in which we operate now. And I think those challenges, as I try to tell folks, get over it. This is the way it is.
Yeah.
Whether you like it or not, it's the way it is and it's the way it's going to be. And so, again, even with a dedicated press corps, then we're also dealing with the folks that aren't part of the Pentagon press corps, that are online journalists, that are bloggers, that are you know, newspaper writers from the Midwest or the West Coast. Again, there's lots of interest in the Department of Defense that comes from all over. And so the volume of desire, if you will, that comes in the door on a daily basis via email, via social media, frankly, has just grown exponentially. So it's all of those things combined that sort of define the press corps that we deal with now. Ed?
The only point I would add is that I think reporters, there are a lot of great reporters around still, there's no question about it. But I think in my day, I think reporters were better prepared. What I've seen is a lot of people come in the door, they don't know the difference between TARP and the Recovery Board, and you got to explain to them that, you know, this is not the TARP program. And they just come in, they're not ready for prime time. And I think part of this, and I think a large part of it, and it really, I think, reflects poorly on journalism, is the zeal or the pushing of reporters, as Dave just pointed out, to compete minute by minute and get this one paragraph, which none of you are going to read, before some other publication gets it. It's kind of competition for competition with no sense. And so that's the one thing that I've seen and was disappointing to me as coming into this job. I thought people prepared for a story the way I prepared for a story. Certainly a lot of reporters that I worked with did. And I found that not to be the case in many cases.
We don't know who reporters are anymore.
Yeah.
You know,
Everybody's a reporter.
Well,
right?
I blog, therefore I am a journalist.
Yeah.
You know, the other thing that's particularly interesting is now how information is being sold. You know, we at the Labor Department have a lot of sensitive economic data, and you know, we'd have a lockup procedure, and there's a way to ensure that, you know, reporters can get that information. Now we're dealing with algorithmic trading organizations who, just because they add news to their name, call themselves a news organization, and this is causing a lot of problems for us. But you know, Patch.com, which has citizen journalists who, you know, oh, I have nothing to do, so I'm going to write about, you know, this. A lot of it, in theory, is great. You know, the Patch is a terrific idea and really drilling down to local news, but we don't know who a reporter, and anybody with a laptop is a reporter now.
And a lot of them have, there are a lot more agendas now than
Yeah.
there used to be. I mean, you have people coming in, they have agendas, and they're not necessarily interested in what the truth is. They're interested in fitting their truth into their agenda.
And I would just add quickly, and I don't say this as a ding on the organization, just to and it's not news now, but the first time that I got a call from somebody that identified themselves as a reporter for the Center for Public Integrity, I said, "You're a what?"
Yeah.
"I'm a reporter." "Really?" You know, and again, that's become more the norm, but the first time I heard that. So
How did
again,
you react? I mean, this person at the Center for Public Integrity, in fact, does do some pretty good stuff. Did you say, and you're not accredited, or what did you say?
No, again, they do now, but when
Yeah.
they first sort of broke into doing reporting, it was a surprise. And it was that same idea of, you know, what's your, because it was an unknown.
They provide content.
Right.
They provide content. So Eva, you're crafting communication strategies with various constituencies. What's your observations on you know, the growth of this huge world of bloggers and Center for Responsive Politics and Patch.com? Never even heard of that, but
Shame on you.
Okay, go ahead, Eva.
I think it's, I completely agree. It's reality right now. I agree with the comment, it is what it is. It's a different way of communicating, but perception is reality. The barrier to information getting out, whether it's good or bad, has dissolved. So anybody can say anything and make a case for anything, whether the information is true or not. And the internet internet helps distribute information without any kind of filter on it, or to validate whether information is correct. So from my side of the fence, it's more being proactive and getting your message out there, listening, using technology to listen. And I don't mean that in a subservient or a secret type of way. There's public domain technology that you can use to listen and hear what people are talking about, and to make sure that your communication strategy is reflective and responding to the concerns that you hear that are out there. So it's a very almost defensive, proactive, engaging, not from the top of the tower, but down at the ground level, working with people and hearing what they're saying, and trying to get those messages and counteract them right away.
So we have one question right there, from the gentleman who's been waiting. We have another question up here from the from these two ladies in the front row.
Adding to the question for Eva in regards to social media measurement, there's no question that we're hearing from you that it's important to have an integrated communication strategy, brand. We need to define our program, or it will be defined for us. You mentioned tools. I've found that in looking at social media measurement tools that can measure the frequency, the sentiment of coming from the general public, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, all those things. Is it the place of government to monitor that on a large scale, or do we run into issues like the Paperwork Reduction Act or using cookies, things like that? In other words, we can't track our advertising without getting OMB approval by using ad tags in media, unless we get OMB approval. However, when it comes to social media, we're not hearing a lot of guidance about some of these emerging tools, Groundswell, Nielsen's Insight, I think another one, Meltwater's another one. Any guidance on that from any of the panelists, or Eva, you might have some ideas?
Well, I would just say that you're right. We do have our restrictions, just like any organization. There are guidelines that we have to work within. With the government, we're working with OMB guidelines, but that doesn't preclude us from, fortunately, there are many different ways that we can get at the same data. So we may not be able to use cookies, but we are able to go out and observe what other people are talking about, or we're able to tap into, if we can't do research because of OMB restrictions on data collection, we can use secondhand sources to get data, and then you have to triangulate and do the best that you can. Yeah, it's
Yes, right here. Here, well, here's a mic for you.
Oh, thank you. By the way, Carl, I liked your comment about the Kardashian example. That's a good one. And it's a real, and then it's a reality. The medium has to conform to the brand, right? It has to be in alignment. You can't have a complete disconnect. But I have a general question for everyone here. We've talked about the proliferation of channels, and the explosion will continue, will escalate, in fact. And Carl, you very eloquently talked about how important it is to be not just information officers, that you have to provide the context of the data that you're putting out there. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about what you're doing. Yes, there are a lot of channels out there, and you don't really have control over what each channel really does. However, in this climate, though, what are you doing proactively to take some control over the narrative? And that's critical. You don't have control over what everyone else says, but there are measures that you can put into place so that you have greater control over the narrative, the story that you want to get out.
Can I take, I mean, a couple of examples of what we're doing at the Labor Department. And I get a little embarrassed bragging about a newsletter. But you know, the U.S. Department of Labor has a newsletter that has 130,000 subscribers. We started with, you know, at the beginning of the administration, we started with a list that we inherited of about 25,000 people. We created a really terrific newsletter that embeds video and slideshows, and when we do conference calls with reporters, we embed that. It's become a great internal communications tool because our all 16,000 of our employees get it, but we have grown to 120,000 subscribers, and we average about 500 new subscribers a week. You know, that's a larger subscription base than some very respected regional newspapers, and we're very proud of that. And it is pure propaganda. We repackage news releases, we do what's the secretary doing, what's the deputy secretary doing, what are all the assistant secretaries doing, and we get good feedback on it. And we're actually using it as a way to make, you know, we can check how many people are doing click-throughs, and we can see that it does have some sort of results in that, you know, we do send it to all of our reporter lists, and we've actually noticed that you know, they won't do a story about it because we sent them a press release, but they'll do a story when we've packaged it as a story, and then they see it. Another thing that I think is really interesting is how blogging and how blogging is being used as a way to get your message out to traditional media. I'll give one example. We have the Wage and Hour division, which is minimum wage and overtime. We had a great bunch of cases about blue jeans, cases against Levi Strauss stores with the assistant managers weren't being paid, and some facilities across the country that were, you know, paying people who made blue jeans 25 cents an hour. The administrator is a mother of 2 teenage boys, and she wrote this great blog called My Life and Work in Blue Jeans, because her 2 teenage sons are all blue jeans fanatics, and now her life is because all of this work. Delightful blog, very interesting. A couple of days later, it appears in a bunch of religion columns in newspapers all over the country. Kansas City Star's religion column, you know, and the Los Angeles Times religion column in the newspaper. We never sent it to them. They're following us on Twitter. We Twitter the blog, and people just picked it up. And so that's pretty extraordinary. I will tell one other thing. The decline in newspapers and newspaper staffing sometimes is an advantage. And I'll be very honest with you, we take great advantage of the fact that newspapers also need content. On Labor Day, we did 100 op-eds across the country, newspapers all over the country. I mean, that's our holiday, so and it was not a hard sell. But I just got the report on how we did on Veterans Day. We have the Veterans Employment Training Service as part of the Labor Department. 60 op-eds in, to the Tampa Tribune, the Columbus Dispatch, good papers. And it's not a hard sell. Here's the thing. We need the people in the regions who can, who have the ability and the talent to call an op-ed editor who's busy and to be able to pitch. That's really where it comes down to the people. It really does.
And that's where social media actually can be very helpful.
Yeah.
And I'll mention one of our great projects that we were fortunate to work on, business.gov, which was part of SBA. And we've got some SBA people in the front here. But we worked with them for 3 years, first when the program was stood up. And business.gov is a program that was initially funded by 21 different government agencies to help provide small and medium-sized businesses with information originally on, just went out of my head. Anyways, credentialing. Anyways, and what we did was we first looked at who's using the business.gov site, and we went around the country, talked to different people, did some research on what areas of the country are businesses growing in, and then realized that there are certain pockets, and so we segmented the audience. We aligned ourselves, and on SBA's behalf, we built partnerships with different associations that represented those different industry groups that were growing. And the word I was thinking was regulation. We originally, business.gov was to help small and medium-sized businesses deal with regulations, and we had the conversation earlier about regulations. But anyways, over a period of time, we were able to use those partnerships that we had built with the different industry and community and public and media associations, chambers of commerce, to get content on their websites. And then from there, our strategy evolved to getting bloggers on board that could be champions for business.gov. And so when SBA.gov was relaunched and business.gov was incorporated into SBA.gov, part of our strategy was to build that groundswell ahead of time to let people know that this was going to happen and how it would affect them, and then get them to help us launch SBA.gov to the people that were in the blogosphere and online that were important to communicate and transfer our message. So it could be a very, very valuable tool. It was a very phased approach, starting with traditional research, figuring out the markets, where are we going to get the most bang for the buck, a lot of phone calls, a lot of letters and packets mailed, but within a year or so, almost all of our communications were online, and then the traditional setting up the speaking engagements, submitting for panelist opportunities so we could talk to people about the website. But social media was a huge, huge part of us building channels for distributing the message that we needed to distribute.
I think we had a question right here. Oh, and there's one right here also.
Hi, I'm Linda, and I work for USAID. Obviously, we're in the news quite a bit. Not really, that's the problem. We're not in the news quite a bit. A lot of people don't even know what it is. A lot of people don't understand. What are you talking about? U.S. Agency for International Development. And my question is that as far as the media goes, it's great that our executives and our administrator, he's out there, he's trying to get everybody on board and get out our case and what we do and et cetera. However, the real people that should be trained in what to say and what to do are the worker bees. The people that are sitting at the bar, which this has happened to me a couple of times, had a drink and somebody, oh, you're with AID, because I wear my pin, and they said, so what was the problem with the hurricane? And I would go, my response has to continually be, please consult our public affairs on any questions. I was asked a question at the last Excellence in Government from a reporter from the Post, gave my personal opinion, specifically said, this is my personal opinion. Of course, that part was dropped, and it came out, this is what AID says about HR and trying to hire. Well, I was politely reminded again, just refer them to the LPA. The problem is that the individual workers are the ones that are being asked, are being told, what do we do to be able to open up the communications, being able to utilize our worker bees and mid-level managers to be able to get our story out there, because we do work hard, we do a great job. But if you have people that are like, what is USAID? Then obviously we're not doing a good enough. One thing with that I have very much commend Dr. Shaw is that we do have a Facebook now, and he's really trying to get into the social media. So I really applaud him. That was a hard decision because there's so many variables with what we do. So I have to say that was good. But I don't know what we need to do to move forward to get our story out from down here, not necessarily from up here.
I think that's a terrific question. And so, you know, it really should not be the job exclusively of the public affairs shop to tell your story, basically. In our own little institution, I'm looking at a couple of colleagues. We're out there telling our story all the time, every one of us. Dave, why don't you start, and then we'll go on down the line here, and we may make that the last question because I just got a little sign held up to over there that said, wrap up. So anyway, but that's a great question to end on. And so
effective communication.
Yeah, that was effective.
Yeah,
I did get the message, yes.
I, of course, know USAID very well. And it really comes down to, as you suggested, empowering the individuals in your organization. Now, again, big organizations are afraid of that. They're always looking for the bad things that are going to happen. You have to find a way to get them over that. Some of the most amazing things I've seen said come from 19-year-old Lance Corporals. There was a quote right after 9/11 that came from a private first class in the Marine Corps that was the New York Times quote of the day. There are lots of examples of that. And we always tried to push commanders to give free rein to their folks to talk to the press. Because one, the reporters can sniff out a plant, you know, somebody that just has the talking points and been shoved up there, you know, to deliver them. But again, it makes organizations uncomfortable because you will have the guy at the bar, and not that Marines go to bars, but hypothetically, that would say, well,
record,
let me
right?
tell you, you know, and give them all that stuff. But empowering individuals, and for me, and my message to commanders is, I don't need to be the spokesman. You know, I am a mile wide and an inch deep on all these topics. This person knows everything there is about that subject. I mean, even if we put a kid up there that says, I drive trucks, and I love driving trucks, and here's why. That's a great story. It doesn't have to come from a colonel. It doesn't have to come from a public affairs officer. In fact, it's better not to. So we try to facilitate, you know, lining up interviews with people at all levels and empowering them to talk. But it is scary for organizations to do that.
I've got lots of thoughts. I could talk to you afterwards forever. This is so close and dear to my heart. But effective messaging, and I'm glad you brought up the bar situation first. Because, hypothetically, because we have a saying in our office when we introduce, when we start off working on a messaging session with a client, we say our goal is that if somebody is sitting in a bar, you walk into somebody, you're sitting next to them in the bar, and you say, or at the bus stop, you know, or wherever, and you say, I work for so-and-so, or that such and such organization, and the person that you're talking to is able to finish your sentence with, oh, they're the organization that does this. And that's effective messaging, and that's effective branding, where what you want somebody to think about you is what they're going to say about you versus them saying what's not correct. And then with the internal messaging, it can be, it's coming from the top, But it can be an internal messaging can be distributed so that people know what to say. Part of the thing is people don't know what to say. So if you can communicate and help them know what to say, it can be very effective. The other thing is using the right channels. And the way communications have changed, you have to go to people with channels that they understand. And we talked a little bit about recruiting, especially with some of the recruiting and the reaching out to the multicultural audiences. You get into different languages, different trusted authorities, so the whole communications strategy is different.
Ed?
We do this quickly. We obviously have people besides myself who speak and talk about the board, but bottom line, it's got to be the same message.
No organization, big or small, public, private, nonprofit, does enough internal communications, employee communications, number one. Number two, employees are ambassadors and messengers, and leadership has to recognize that. And as much as we talk about Twitter and Facebook and Google and stuff like that, word of mouth is still pretty darn powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Carl, and thank all of you for being here today. I think this has been a very interesting discussion on a very timely topic. Please join me in giving our panel a round of applause. Could have gone on a lot longer, couldn't we?